Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and with me today again is Father John Whiteford. It's great to have you on, Father John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he's risen. What's it? Christos Voskressi, Voice New Voskressi, right?
Right.
Is that or no one does that in Texas?
That's what we do it in Texas quite a bit.
There you go. Very good.
I just got back from spending 16 days in Moldova, so now I've got the Romanian responses down pretty well.
really? So you were just in Moldova.
Yeah.
How is it there? How is the average person in Moldova processing both the elections in Romania and in general, just the whole situation with Russia? Do they feel like the West is interfering too much? They just hate everyone. What's your feel with your ear on the ground there in the rail?
Well, I don't. I don't encounter many Moldovans that spend their time thinking about politics. But one thing I did encounter when I was there was, you're aware of the situation we've talked about in Ukraine with the persecution of the canonical church. In Moldova, there's some analogies to what's going on, although it's different, because Moldova was part of Romania historically about 300 years ago. It was annexed by the Russian Empire. After World War I, it was part of Romania again between the wars, and then briefly after the Axis invaded. But then it went back under the Soviets. So the Church of Moldova has always been under, in the last 300 years, it's been under the Russian Church with the exception of this period between the wars. And so the Romanian Church apparently doesn't think Russia should claim this territory. And they established their own diocese there. And the government of Moldova, which I think probably is there largely through Western interference, let's just say, because the people in Moldova don't seem to be big fans of it. They're trying to push the Moldovan Orthodox Church into the Romanian Patriarchate because they also want Moldova to become part of Romania ultimately. And I happened to serve at a parish near the village I spent most of my time at. I have a parishioner whose uncle and aunt are the priest and machka of the parish. And the priest was in the hospital because he had to have a surgery. And not long before I served there on St. George's Day, this Romanian diocese apparently made an attempt to try to seize that church. So it's not as blatant as what's going on in Ukraine. However, the mayor was behind it, who's an appointed mayor. He wasn't elected. He was appointed by the president. I don't remember all the details of that. But
so it seems like a bunch of normal people caught in the middle of geopolitics, and the Moldovans most closely align themselves with Romanians.
Right. And after the liturgy, I had lunch with the mashka, and without me prompting her, she said, "This is just like what's going on in Ukraine. It's not exactly the same, but she had to lock the church because these people were they wanted to do a service in the church, but the priest got wind that they actually intended to take it over with the help of the mayor. And there was one parishioner of theirs, an old lady, that went up to the mayor and smacked him in the face. I don't think she was prosecuted.
There you go.
But she didn't appreciate this kind of stuff. So unfortunately, this kind of stuff is going on in Moldova's. There's a lot of people in the West that want to push Moldova into getting involved in this war, which there'd be fewer things that could be more catastrophic for Moldova than for that to actually happen. But powers that be in the West don't care.
Well, that being said, the topic today won't be old ladies punching men in the face, or is it the geopolitical situation in Moldova, though. It's a fun place, I'm sure, to visit. The rector of the Orthodox churches in Southeast Asia is Moldovan, Father Paisi, who's been on this channel. The topic today is Orthodox Christian homeschooling. It's interesting because you, as a father to two homeschool daughters, and your daughters passing the baton and beginning, one of your younger daughter is the one. No, it's the older daughter that has the two children.
The older one has 3 grandchildren now. Yeah.
So that being said, right, the homeschooling starting there, myself doing homeschooling. So it's a topic that we're both interested in and directly connected to, but yet we've never done. So it's interesting to be able to do that now and get into homeschooling. Just before we start, I just want to remind people, it's like Father Paisi from Moldova is one of the missionaries in Southeast Asia, and he's the rector of the churches in Cambodia. I just want to encourage viewers of this channel and of this show in particular. If this show is a blessing to you, to bless the missionary work in Cambodia, you could do so by going to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Links to the PayPal, which is preferred, but also Venmo, and to be a monthly contributor at Patreon are below. It's your prayers are appreciated, and of course, the consider being a missionary, which is a big deal. But we got to talk about the missionary work that we do in the home, which is with homeschooling. And the most effective form of missionary work has always been, other than converting royalty, educating the Christian people in a given area. And in effect, that makes your home the tip of the spear to a mission as well, because you're educating your own children. Now, I'm unsure if I am missing any credentials for you, Father. I just want people to be aware the credentials, the people commenting on homeschooling here, that you homeschooled with your wife, your own children. Is there anything else that people should be aware of, just your credentials and experience on the topic of education?
Well, just that I've done it, but also our parish, after the lockdowns, we established a homeschool co-op, which has become very popular among my parishioners. So we've been doing that since, I think, 2021.
Yeah, it's amazing what some Orthodox churches put together. Their co-ops grow so big, they actually have become full-blown schools. So
Yeah.
that's occurred as well. Now, as for my own credentials, because people are used to me being the guy with the YouTube channel, I homeschool my own son. My master's degree is at Teachers College at Columbia University, so I have a degree in pedagogy. And my actual job for money, ironically, is not education and it's not theology. I train and manage investigators. And to be perfectly frank, I do find a lot of the basics of how do you train people to acquire legal skills, investigatory skills, are methodologically similar to really what I do with my own homeschooling and what I've done in the classroom before entering the auto repair world and what I do homeschooling my own son. So those are my credentials. And otherwise, we're going to have fun with it and give people just some ideas. We're going to have a wide gamut here because there are people in all different stages, people considering homeschooling, people that are already homeschooling, and also others that are not married. They don't have kids yet, but they're passively maybe interested in the topic. So we're going to be covering the topic from all those angles. So that being said, let me give a disclaimer to start. And Father, by all means, interject if you have more of your own disclaimers. Father John and I are two different people from two different generations, two different backgrounds, kids with different needs, I'm sure. So we may have different pedagogical approaches, and we'll be communicating those different approaches. Every child is different, and educational tips here may obviously not apply in every specific situation. That's worth saying. This is not about special education. My own brother, who also has an education degree, has a lot of hands-on experience in special education, and it actually, in the beginning rudiments, has some very similar things because a lot of special education is learning basics and skills and reinforcement and things like that. But there's not going to be any sort of specialty in this discussion in special education. So that's a very interesting um, topic in its own right. And I think in downloading my Google Doc, that last bullet point became a cryptogram of whatever it was before. I don't even know what it means anymore. But I do want to, I think it's trying to say this. Homeschooling can be done even if you're still having a standard, normal education with your kids, because you could supplement what they're getting at a Christian school or at a public school with additional skills by homeschooling. There's people that work full-time jobs that also homeschool their kids. So you could have your kid into school during the day, but still be doing the education you want. that may not be advisable. It depends on your values, and we'll discuss some of that, some ideas. We have this. When Father John comes on, you know it's going to be good. So there you go. Even the Oriental Orthodox love Father John. So that being said, should I homeschool? I think it's the first big question. And I think the obvious thing people think about is EQ versus IQ, or in other words, homeschool kids are weird. And unless you put them to a public school where essentially things that are illegal for everyone outside of a public school is happening every day in that school, your kids will grow up strange without all that abuse. And so it's worth talking about that stereotype that homeschool leads to smaller EQ. And of course, you hear about the super homeschool moms that literally drive their kid to everything on the planet, to every spelling bee debate club, sporting event, the YMCA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's this obvious emphasis to kind of counteract the EQ versus IQ. And this is because otherwise, without this concerted effort to inject your child into these social education situations, homeschools could, not do, but could shelter children. And so that could be good and that could be bad. I'll get into some details. But let me just ask you this, Father John. Is it true? Are homeschool kids weird? Your daughters grow up weird?
No, my younger daughter is the national co-chair of the Young Republicans, and so her social skills obviously are fairly good for her to have been able to get to that position.
So you brought up a political influencer.
Well, I didn't set out to. When she turned 18, I wanted to make sure she would know enough about the process to be an informed voter, but I might have overdone it a little bit.
Your daughter has very strong opinions about Moldova and Transnistrian situation, I'm sure. And so yes, and what sort of efforts you and Matushka do to sort of balance out the EQ versus IQ? Because the IQ is there, right? Don't they know like 3 languages each and stuff? So how did you do the EQ portion?
Well, the reality of it is that when children interact with adults, they learn social skills and they don't learn the negative socialization that you have in public schools in so many cases.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually the way that education has normally happened throughout human history. In Book of Deuteronomy, where God commands people to pass on the faith to their children, they're commanded to teach the children when they rise up, when they go out, when they come in. Basically, in any opportunity throughout the day, you're constantly supposed to be teaching your children. The idea of segregating children by age and send them off for somebody else to do it is not what what God was talking about there. And the thing is as long as you have your children involved in the church, and particularly when you have other activities that they're involved in, they're going to be interacting with other kids. So they're going to learn how to interact with other folks. As long as, if you locked them up in your house all day and you never let them out, then they would obviously have some stunted social skills. But that's not a problem I've seen with actual homeschooled kids in my experience. They seem to be more articulate than your average kid. And one big problem with education that we have now is just the use of technology, smartphones, and all that kind of stuff. And so we have kids that don't know how to look another person in the eye and have a conversation because they're so used to interacting with their smartphone that they don't know how to have a conversation with another human being. And when you homeschool, you actually have some control over that. And I would suggest that one of the key things that anybody who's trying to educate their children ought to be doing is to make sure that their children don't have access to a smartphone and until they're maybe 17 or 18 years old, in my opinion, because children are going to learn how to use technology. They don't have to start when they're 7. And unfortunately, I see kids that are like 3 that already know their way around a smartphone pretty well. I don't think
3? That's pretty old.
Kids ought to not, have regular access to a smartphone. I think it's one thing, if you show your kids a video because it's handy and you're using your phone to do it, but they ought to not be the ones controlling that. And and you really want your children to learn how to read and to write and to think apart from gadgetry, because that's the only way they're going to learn how to do it really well on their own. In China, because they write with characters, it's obviously a little bit more of a complicated written language than our language is. But because of smartphones, they now have what's known as character amnesia, where when people are trying to write, they can't remember how to write a character, so they look it up on their phone. So if they don't have their phone, they have a very difficult time writing anything of any length that has any complicated words in it. And so this is become a somewhat ubiquitous problem, but it's one that you can control if you're homeschooling.
There's a larger issue I've noticed with I'm going to say broadly Asian education, because I've observed that East Asian and Southeast Asian, just the degree of cheating, because it's not even overtly seen as cheating. It's almost like this kind of communal effort. And that being said, now with AI and whatnot, people literally taking pictures of the screens, the pictures of what the questions are and getting answers. It's going to lead to some major problems. That being said, I got some interesting comments here. Your homeschool kids would be weird and not normal like the publican kids. And my 4 kids all turned out weird, but in a good way.
Well,
And
I'll give you an example of just the contrast I observed. There's a girl right around the corner that grew up the same age as my older daughter, and they even look like they could be related. I mean, they look like they could. If you'd have told people that they were sisters, people would have found it believable because they look that similar. And they played constantly before the other girl was old enough to go into public school, but her parents put her in public school. We homeschooled.
Mhm.
Well, by the time that girl was in high school, she thought she was a man trapped in a woman's body. And when she got out of high school, she started to snap back to some extent, but she really still is dealing with some of the after effects of that and has not gotten married, whereas both of my daughters are married and they're both married to men. So I think that's a big plus for homeschooling right there. So
there you go. That's the slogan. Homeschool your daughters, they'll marry men.
that's right.
Or like as Oriental Orthodox here says, they'll be weird in the Lord rather than normal in the world. And sadly, it's weird to be a female married to a man these days. That's not a good thing, especially if he's a white man. That's a bigger problem.
By the way, would our 2 wives qualify as Oriental Orthodox?
Oh, because they're Asian. Yeah, it's like they could play both sides. I'm Eastern Orthodox, but I'm also Oriental Orthodox. But I'm not Coptic Orthodox. I don't know. We'd have to ask them, I suppose. But it does lead us to talk about the good versus bad. The good, right? They're more likely to get good values, to be good in the Lord, and maybe not normal in the world.
Right.
The bad is that there is something to learning what all the normies went through, right? They had to deal with, getting in fights and knowing how to conduct themselves in adversarial situations. Take the situation my brother when he lived in the inner city for almost 10 years. When he lived in the inner city, you could look straight ahead and you know what's going on here. You get this peripheral vision. You know who's slanging dope. You know who's doing this, doing that, because you got to know what's going on around you. And so, yeah, if you go to prison, you'll get all sorts of prison knowledge and be able to conduct yourself and be tougher, but also it will corrupt you in other ways. And that's sort of the reality of what happens in public schools and to a lesser extent, private schools. But the reality is you'll be dealing with that to some extent the rest of your life. The question is to what extent is useful or not. There's pros and cons. I do have a good friend who was homeschooled, and he mentions that he feels it prevents him from navigating certain, again, emotional situations as an adult. That he is almost a little too much of a pushover, maybe, not that he lets people push him over, but people think that he's a pushover because he gives an affect of not being a gruff jerk, which apparently the rest of us publicly educated people just naturally give off because we've done our time in prison, right? We have the 1,000-yard stare from having gone to public schools, and the homeschool kids just don't learn the stare. They don't know how to have that dangerous gaze. So that's kind of part of it, but it's a reality, and it's worth at least talk about, even if flippantly. That being said, let's talk about the good things that we avoid, which is, especially these days, the social issues, right? It's your kid goes to a public school. It could be in West Virginia. It could be in the reddest of red states. They're going to be get alphabet soup. I'm not going to spell out what alphabet soup is, but you could guess. Um, you're going to be taught, the kids are going to be taught Marxism, which I call social injustice, because it's not about what's right or what's fair. It's about wealth redistribution based on race, based on gender, based on constructs that are literally invented by the day at this point. And so your kids are being brainwashed on social issues. And I think most profoundly, and this is something that is older than the two issues I just named, is just the hypersecularism, the idea that we should approach the world with a materials philosophy, which is just ingrained and inbuilt into a secular education. That is a very massive presumption, which is, one, not philosophically justifiable, but two, completely inconsistent with Christian belief. So it's interesting that we would, to think it's a default and normal to send kids to be literally educated in the exactly wrong worldview, the exactly wrong epistemology that is categorically inconsistent with Christian belief. And so that hypersecularism is a thing. Kids will grow up maybe going to church, but church is for fairy tales, and school is for facts. And the real weird part now, Father, is literally you go to school for secular fairy tales. You get to learn about gender that has no connection to actual biology and chromosomes. You get to learn about economics that has no basis in historical economists. You get to learn about justice that has no basis in philosophical writings on the topic for most of history, where they discern the nature of justice, like Plato's Republic and things like this. None of those things are taught in school. And so you get to learn these secular fairy tales. And that is where you start realizing your kids get very little real education in a public school. They mostly get indoctrination into secularism. And so that's something worth bringing up, and something I just want to give you a moment to comment on, if you have anything to add on that note.
If a child was raised by wolves, they would acquire some skills that most people don't acquire, but I wouldn't recommend that as a way to raise children. And if you threw a child into a prison yard and said, "I hope you make it okay, I'll see you in about 10 years," they would acquire a lot of skills there too. But they'd also acquire a lot of baggage. And I think that homeschooling, you allow your children to develop as Orthodox Christians, and they come to a sense of self-awareness as they reach maturity, where they're able to handle this kind of stuff better. And as far as the friend that you mentioned that feels like he's a pushover because he was homeschooled, if I had boys, I would have made sure that they had gotten martial arts training. I think I benefited.
Your wife couldn't do that? Your wife didn't know Kung Fu?
No, but I benefited.
Yeah, my wife doesn't know kickboxing. It's a ripoff.
I benefited from taking martial arts when I was in high school. In a lot of ways, I noticed I became a lot more coordinated than I used to be, but when I started taking martial arts. But I got into fights on a regular basis throughout my childhood until I started taking martial arts, and I never got into another fight again. And I think that the reason was because once I had studied martial arts for a while, I had a level of confidence to where I didn't come across as being intimidated, and I also didn't feel like I had much to prove either. And so when I got into situations that in my earlier days would have developed into a fight, they did. And so that's what I would recommend. Being a Christian doesn't mean that you should be weak. It means that you should be strong, but you should have the ability to control yourself and behave like a Christian. So I think that particularly boys should be encouraged to become as strong as they possibly can be and as able to defend themselves as they can be.
And that's a very interesting thing. And we see this from Agape, turn the other cheek, ignored. And I just have this comment, and I'm actually not sure it's right? Like, as parents, you're kind of inventing it as you go, right? There's no real rule book other than, the scriptures and the fathers, but not like with every situation you could consult with, how to bring up your kids. And so when I go to Cambodia, I bring my kid and he plays with, this is in America where there's all these people helicoptering and protecting kids from every situation. The kids are like how they used to be. They roughhouse, they just go off and do whatever. And so the kids are tougher. So I always warn my kid. I said, "This is not America. They're going to be tough. You can't cry. You have to pick yourself back up if you get knocked down or whatever." And they all knock each other down and they all have fun and they have a great time. But that being said, the Russian kids there are just like the Cambodian kids. It's just the Americans that are soft and pushovers, and I would guess the Western Europeans as well.
Right.
And so the older Russian boy there, that we spent a lot of time with, the Father Roman's son, is being tough with my son because they're boys. They're doing picking order stuff, right?
Right.
And my son's not used to that in America. So pretty much I said, listen, just even though he's a bigger kid and he's older, go push back. And, if he stops, just leave it there. The idea is not to, and I actually explained to my kid, it's not because it's to escalate a fight or to prove a point. It's sometimes fighting back actually diffuses the situation. It diffuses the aggression.
Right.
So if turning the other cheek diffuses the aggression, then turn the other cheek. It's not about pride. That's the whole point of that teaching. But if sometimes standing up or even being a little physical is what diffuses the situation, you have to do that as well. And maybe I'm wrong, saith me not the Lord, but right when you see it happening with your kids, and that's the best answer I got. I don't know if it sounds like you're saying yeah. So
well, I think
the right answer.
Whether a person turns the other cheek in a particular situation is going to depend on a lot of factors, but you also want to be able to defend other people. And I had 3 older brothers growing up, and there were some occasions where having older brothers that were protecting me from other older kids came in handy. And I don't think there's any reason why you should turn somebody else's cheek. If somebody's attacking somebody who's weak and you're on the ability to defend them, you should do that. But you have to have the ability to do it. And
it's someone breaks into your house and could be a danger to your kids, your wife, or you're walking a city street and someone could be a danger to your family. It could get physical, and that's why the church has penances and stuff. So anyway, that being said, there's the larger question, which I think is very interesting. Should I homeschool? Now, a lot of people watching this have already made this decision of homeschool their kids, but there could be a lot of young men and young women watching this over the years, where here's some things to think about. And I love this picture. So there's I guess, 20-something woman discerning. Should I be the career woman or should it be mama? And my wife looked at this and she said, "Oh, why can't it be both?" And so some people think this way. And this is my comments, which is there's this super mom myth versus reality. Okay. For maybe every one woman out of 100 that literally could do it all and burn the midnight oil and do incredible things, having a fully invested career and being a fully invested mother, I do think there's wisdom in the scripture that no one could serve two masters, God or mammon. In the same way, if I'm speaking as a man with a career, am I there every second of the day with my son during the day? I can't be. I homeschool after I come back from work. Okay. And so am I as intricately involved as a father as I would otherwise be if I were at home every day? And of course not. And so that's just basically understanding what schedules and time does to our attention. And so there's this sort of false bill of goods that women should be expected to work the double shift and be super mom. And quite frankly, if this happens when husbands get injured or based on social class, or you happen to live in California or New York City, it's literally impossible to afford survival without two people working. And there's always been people working. The stream I did previous to this one was on female saints, and we speak about female saints with jobs. And so this is not to talk about every situation. It's for you discerning. Don't simply presume and have the pride and think that I could just do it all. I mean, that just sounds wrong. You have to immediately go, maybe I can't do it all. What are my priorities? And this is where, when we start listing priorities, that it might make more obvious. Well, if I do choose career, like we see in the bubble to the left, I might not have the bubble to the right. Like I have family that doesn't have the bubble to the right because they chose bubble to the left. That's very common among millennials and now Zoomer women. We'd be liars if we don't bring this up. Um, there's women to the right with work, whether part-time, remote work. They do the tag in, tag out with the husband, and they work shifts with different hours. Of course, all these things exist, but it does take time away from being a homeschool parent. Or even if you, let's say like me, sure, I could be the homeschool parent when I come home from work, but then am I the homemaker? Right? Am I cooking all the meals? Am I always cleaning the house? Am I always doing all the things that homemakers do? And that's part of the puzzle. And this is something that people have to be mindful of, because older women are to teach younger women, according to, I think it's in Titus chapter 2, to be keepers of the home. This is one of the things that women do. Or we read in Proverbs 31 about a very industrious woman who buys and sells land and manages a household with servants, but she's still doing actual homemaking. This is something that's always been something expected of women, even with female saints, that queens of countries, as they spoke about, still do homemaking activities. This is something that has been proved to be spiritually beneficial to women over centuries. In my opinion, it's the primary meaning of the scripture that women will be saved as through childbirth, as it talks about in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Not the literal giving of birth, but in the rearing of children and the keeping of a home and all that entails. That it's a sort of obedience that is spiritually beneficial to women, just like men have their obediences. And so if you can discern, am I going to homeschool or not? You have to discern, well, if you're going to be a full-time homeschooler, homemaking comes along with that. All right. I'm going to speak very frankly, Father, and you could disagree, but I know men who work full-time. They have a full-time homemaking wife who also homeschools, and they are microwaving their dinner, and it's like a frozen pot pie, right? They're doing a lot of the homemaking and not a lot is getting home. And this is something where, being that I homeschool myself, I'm aware of the time constraints and lack thereof. Homemaking needs to be part of that puzzle. You could be working for a boss and giving all your time and energies to that boss, or you could be giving that to your family. And those time and energies will include things at home, like making sure food is cooked. And there's nothing wrong with cooking food. But the fact that we live in a society where they give apologies for this, like that's some terrible thing, speaks to, I feel, how the world is trying to take away from women the emphasis on activities that are actually very spiritual beneficially. Because as I said, the scriptures and the saints and even female saints that are queens of countries are doing homemaking activities. I think another thing that is left out on this is how the father, as head of the household, should decide what skills are important and shape the goals, right? He's like the CEO of the corporation. And again, this should not be very radical because the scriptures and the saints are so unanimous and clear on this issue. But I see all the time, and this includes not just the working woman, but homeschool mothers find it much easier to listen to secular bosses than their own husbands. That secular boss doesn't love you. That secular boss will lay you off and not care the effects on your family. That husband is personally invested in your well-being and the children's well-being, presuming he's not a complete insert expletive here, right? Someone who would pretty much abandon his family, which is a terrible, terrible thing. Presuming he is an average to above average Christian husband, he is definitely CEO of the family material that deserves your devotion and energies more than some random boss who really doesn't care that much about your existence. Unless you happen to also be working in, let's say, a small business, and your secular boss also happens to be your husband, which does exist as well, of course. And so should I homeschool? Because I'll just say this straight, and Father Daniel Sazoyev would have my back on this. It is a spiritual gift. This is what Father Daniel says. It is a spiritual gift to be a homemaker. It is a spiritual gift not to be a working woman. And not every woman is going to want to deal with the husband, and it's going to create as like a CEO of the household. And, he's doing educational goals, and he needs dinner cooked after he's worked physically all day and stuff like that. It's too difficult for them. And so really out of a sense of condescension, their best way to contribute to the family is to have work. And so for most of history, because quite frankly, without police forces and stuff, without male relatives, women would have to be closer to home for physical protection. It's only in modern times where women can have this broader sphere. And this is not to debate whether that's good or bad. I think it'd be good that people are safer, of course. But it does lead where now there's this spiritual option that didn't exist before for women to work out there. Like my wife generally works remotely. So she's at home most days of the week. She's there for the kid. She's there for the kid when he needs to be there and all that, but she doesn't really do the education. She may facilitate things that I ask her to do, but generally speaking, even I do most of the hands-on with the education. I'm not saying that's an ideal situation, but that's my situation. But my wife also works. She's an engineer. And so that being said, it's going to be different in the real world in everyone's situation. But if we're just speaking binaries, these are things that the modern woman has to discern. Do I want to be the homemaker and homeschool mother, or do I want to be a career woman? What compromises am I going to make in between? And of course, you work that out with your spiritual father and your husband, which gets ignored a lot. I think you're making a family decision, just like the husband needs to run things by his wife. Certainly, the wife has to run things by her husband and submit to her husband's judgment of what's good for the spiritual well-being of that household. So that's my comments on those topics. Father, what could you add for us, please?
It's only because of modern technology that it's even an option for a woman to not stay in the home most of the day, because before we had things like washers and dryers that run electronically. You throw your clothes in there, you throw some soap in there, hit the button, and then you throw it in the dryer, and now you've got clean clothes. That used to be something that was an all-day affair. That was something that took that. So women,
homemaking was literal work.
By necessity, had to be about those kinds of things because the house wouldn't be able to function otherwise. And so, technology does give us some options, but it was never the case that a housewife meant sitting around the house and watching TV all day or something like that. I mean, housewives have always been busy about doing things that are absolutely necessary for the survival of the family. And it's just they're fulfilling a different function. But in our times, you could say, okay, well, we've got other options. But the thing is, kids still need a parent that's going to be there. And you might have situations where circumstances dictate that you can't make some choices. For example, let's say you have a wife whose husband's abandoned her, or her husband dies when she's got children she's got to raise, and maybe she's got to work. In cases like that, you might have to have somebody else in the family, like grandparents or something, that step into the role of giving the day-to-day care. But putting kids in daycare is not a good solution. I mean, it might be something that you have to do on some temporary basis, but it'd be something that if you had any other options, you would want to avoid, just because it's just not good for children to be raised by complete strangers. And I really don't understand why anyone would plan on that when they had other options. Because
there's people that simply, I can't stand being near the kid all day.
Yeah.
Now, there's men that are much more honest about that. I don't want to be around that all day. But there's women that feel that way as well. I don't consider it very feminine, but that does exist. And then what are you teaching the kid? You're not that important to me.
Well, the thing is,
they grow up to be cynical, crazy people.
When you start getting closer to my stage in life and beyond,
Father, you got 1 foot in the grave, 1 foot here.
I mean, I'm not as old as I look. I'm 58, and but still, when you start getting toward, the last third of your life, let's say, your career matters less and less, and your family is really the most important thing. And when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking, man, I wish I'd have spent more time in the office. I wish I'd have, gotten the employee of the month more often or something like that. That's not going to matter. It's going to be the people in your life and your children, if you have them, and grandchildren. That's going to be the most important thing. And as I've mentioned before, grandkids are a whole nother level of joy that you have in your life, and I can't even imagine, not having my grandkids around, or having that be a big part of my life. It does sap a lot of my time sometimes, but I don't. I don't say no when I'm asked, in large part because it's hard to say no to something that you want to do.
They're
And
just so cute.
yeah, well, I mean, it's a joy, and so I can't imagine choosing to not have kids, for example, because you want to pursue a career. I think that that's something that people are generally going to live to regret. And a lot of
Yeah.
women start regretting it, and maybe like when they're in their 40s, start thinking about, okay, I want to have a kid. Well, you know what? Mother Nature doesn't wait for you to decide that you want to have kids. There's a window where having kids is pretty easy. And then after that, it starts becoming increasingly difficult. And so you have women spending all kinds of money on fertility treatments and stuff like that, or even adopting children or surrogate mothers, which the church, of course, doesn't approve of. But it's a lot easier when you're in your 20s, when you're physically, you've got the capacity to make babies, and you've got the energy to raise them, than to try to do that
Especially
when
the
you're in
energy.
your late 30s or 40s. What now?
Especially the energy, because
Well, I mean, if you're anybody who's listening to this, if you're like below the age of 25, you probably have no idea what I'm even talking about. But I noticed by the time I was in the last year of my college experience that I was already seeing an energy level drop from what I had when I was at the beginning of college. I just didn't have the same ability to pull all-nighters, for
oh yeah,
example.
I used to be able to, not sleep all night and from 1 hour, and then I'd still be functional next day. I wouldn't be functional anymore. It's
And
different
and the
energy
thing is, when
level.
you have a baby, all-nighters is something that you might have to do sometimes, because sometimes babies don't want to sleep for a variety of reasons, and you have to take care of them.
And yeah, and that creates it creates postpartum for the mothers, because
Right,
obviously they're the first line of defense, because that baby wants milk. Generally speaking, that's how they soothe themselves, and
right, right,
it's a young woman's and young man's game. That's for sure.
right.
Um, we got some comments before we move forward. We have this defense of public schools. They have superior programs. I could have given, and I was a chemistry teacher, and my wife a doctor, and my dad a college professor, used Orthodox priest. My son reads the church fathers and prologue and Bible to start and to take a break in his engineering program. And in my opinion, it's way smarter and more efficient to learn how to get what you want out of a public or private school and supplement at home than do a halfway job to teach calculus, economics, Western Civ. And we will cover this, because you could still end up sending your kid to a school, but still homeschool. And that will be among the topics that we cover here. We have this comment: lack of homeschooling is one of the reasons why cradle Orthodox lose their faith instead of adopting the duty and responsibility to bring friends closer to the faith. And this is actually true, because I see in Jordanville, kids that are homeschooled still know they're Russian. After multiple generations in, they speak English with a Russian accent, actually, because they're speaking Russian all the time at home. It's really cool to see Americans with Russian accents. It's crazy.
Right.
But it does exist, but it shields you from all Russian home, all the American entertainment, and all the bad things. So it's a kind of a good bubble of sorts. But also, as we discussed here, there's kind of downsides as well, because you're not going to have certain elements of EQ that people that been through it, let's say in the public schools, will have in private schools as well. We have this. Thank God that your kids did well in public school. It's not the case for everyone. Many parents do indeed give their children a thorough home education, including calculus and Western civilization. And we'll cover this. I do find, though, that homeschool parents tend to emphasize the liberal arts more than the sciences and math. And the ready-made curriculums seem to try to purposely do the opposite to compensate for it. So that is a real thing that we need to be mindful of. Now, role for technology. Well, Father John already mentioned how they're giving 3-year-old smartphones and kind of turning them to dummies, and people using AI, and it's turning them into dummies. I've even noticed the quality of my commenters on the YouTube channel have decreased radically. They'll go, "Where can I read this from this book? Could you post the link to the book?" And like, you could literally copy and paste it and put it into Google, let alone go to the library, right? Like, like the skills that Father John and I grew up with. And, they won't even know what microfiche is, right? And stuff like that.
Or the
But
card catalog.
but you've ever heard of Dewey Decimal System? But to literally, well, the coolest thing is like when you go to Library of Congress and you're actually pulling out documents, like if you're dealing with the real sources, that's awesome. But that being said, people that are so dumb and lazy, copy and paste is becoming difficult for them. And so this is becoming a real problem. And so we need to reflect on the role of technology. The 1990s, 2000s is wave the future. And so everyone loved technology. And that's why I have that picture of the old white computer up there. Engagement was higher, but pen and pencil still used, right? So like using a computer meant something. You actually learned skills. You actually had to figure out how to troubleshoot because the blue screen of death and all the things that existed on the old computers. And there was no replacement for doing math with a pen and pencil, for the little blue notebooks where you had to write your essays for school. So you couldn't use AI to write your essay. You would think this wouldn't even be a thing. Oh, we can't stop the kids from handing in AI essays. Then have them write essays with a pen and paper.
That's exactly what I think
How
schools need
crazy
to start
is it?
doing.
It's not hard.
Yeah, but because I think that's the only way you can guarantee that you're actually finding out what the person actually
Maybe a
knows.
stupid professor, I could pick AI out, but for the non-conversant, yes, that's obviously the way to go. Now, were there warning signs in the past? Well, as someone who played Team Fortress Classic into 3 a.m. on the weekends, or watched my brother do so, and watching 4 hours of Nintendo 64 on a weeknight, I was less playing video games and just kind of hanging out with my brother while he was playing video games. There were signs of brain rot when I was growing up with technology, but I guess we were at least enough attached to the real world that we still picked up these other skills, knew how to do math with pen and paper, and learned how to use technology in order to do actual research. Hence, I could actually read these books, and I could also read books in PDF, and I know how to data mine books for information, which I'm going to put my chin in the air and say, I might be the first person published on how to data mine historical text. So now everyone does it, right? Everyone downloads a PDF, clicks Control F. Everyone puts target words into a search engine or specific Greek and Latin terms, and then uses the computer to identify these things. But I actually have a footnote in an article that I wrote in 2007, was published in 2010, where I actually detailed the employment of data mining for historical inquiry. And I'm not aware of any earlier article, because that was new back then, where it actually gets to that sort of detail. So I might be the first guy academically published on, I would say, responsible data mining of historical sources, not what it's become, where people, all they do is data mining and they don't know context because they don't actually read. But that being said, that's why there were warning signs in the past. But I think the reality is that, you, Father, right? You rode the computer wave, but you also grew up with how to write things, actually reading books and stuff like that. It made one more well-rounded, and the technology gave someone an edge versus someone that didn't know how to use the technology. But since the 2010s, that edge has disappeared. And this is not just some guy on YouTube complaining. There's like news articles and stuff about this. It's now accepted that to the 2010s to now, there's full-blown brain rot with the technology. There's literal atrophy where people don't know skills. They can't read books. They've lost attention span. They can't do math other than it's on a computer. So a lot of math assessment for young children now is on iReady. But when you're doing math on nothing but computers, you're learning maybe how to eventually use Excel spreadsheets, which is important, right? You do all those calculations and tabulations and all that stuff. But in the real world, right, I got to get stuff done on the driveway. I need to know length times width equals area, right? Like I have to do real math, and it's not that it's complicated math, but um it's not like I put it in the spreadsheet and that's how I figure it out, right? I have to actually go in my driveway, pull out a tape measure, and do stuff like that. Real world math that we do every day. When I go food shopping, I'm not using the AI program to figure out the home economics of unit price and how much food I want and all that stuff. I have to be able to calculate all that in my head, which I'll get into. I believe methodologically in the importance of memorization to the degree, which has become very lost in modern
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in memorization. Ultimately, kids need to learn both. Like I think, right, technology is here, and and I'm not going to fault someone for this, you're going to go full blown Amish lifestyle off the grid, like off the grid bros, which you would never know they're on this, I suppose. Um, that you're going to need to be both, but then the parents' role for technology is to be the gatekeeper, right? And we'll get into like different things with technology you could do in just a moment. But in the end of the day, you need to be hands-on. Don't just hand your kid the tablet. I don't even give my kid a tablet, by the way. But don't just hand them a computer or a smartphone. You need to be the gatekeeper of these things. Just like you wouldn't bring your kid to a bookstore unsupervised with an adult section, or to the Blockbuster, and back then they would have the adult videos in a section, maybe not Blockbuster, but in the local video store. You wouldn't let your kid unfettered in that stuff because you'd be an absolute fool and irresponsible to do those things. In the same way, you're a fool if you let your kid have access to the whole world of stuff with all the horrible things that are out there. That's just literally insane. It's like letting your kid into a terrible, bad neighborhood, but on the internet. But sadly, this now includes the public library. I would not want a young child unsupervised at public library because the social justice stuff, the alphabet soup stuff, um, all the things in library. Now the literal propaganda, they'll have posters up saying graphic novels is reading too. So yeah, being an idiot is reading too, is what you're teaching people. And I guess reading a comic is a kind of reading, and there's nothing wrong with reading comics, just like there's nothing wrong with hitting a baseball. It's just not an educational activity, right? There's a difference between reading, and amusing yourself. And amusing yourself is fun.
Even in the children's book section, you have to be discerning, because there are children's books that are pushing transgenderism and homosexuality and all kinds of crap like that.
Yeah.
And your kid's obviously not going to be able to make that discerning judgment, so you need to make it.
And not just the moral rot. We're both parents of biracial kids, or whatever the terminology is these days. I don't know. But that being said, I'm offended as a parent to a child that actually looks like the kids in the books. If you walk into a library, not one of the kids on the kids' books will be white. And so you're teaching your children, if they happen to be white, that they're worthless and that they're not worth being on the front of the book, or they're bad for some reason and shouldn't be on the front of the book. And that offends me, despite my kid looking like the kids on the book, because that's not right. That's the value you're teaching your kids. And it's not honestly, Father, you're a full-blown white guy. To Europeans, I'm already biracial because I'm a half Jew. They don't consider Jews white. So whatever you want to consider me, I don't care. It's an accident of my birth, I suppose. But that being said, it's just not right that, I would say at least the school library should be proportionally represent the actual demographics of the people that are there. Or God forbid, it's just the most popular stuff and the most educational stuff is what there, and not these larger political issues. But it's not being paranoid. Walk into your library tomorrow and you will see there's not a single white child in any of those books. And I'm not saying this because I'm a white supremacist, because for the reasons I just stated. It's because it's offensive to the families that still have white children that are still the majority of this country. And just because a child is white, it doesn't make them less of a child than any of the other children represented on these books. They should all be represented. And so that's another thing that kids see, and it's that secular social programming and stuff we wouldn't even think about as kids. The library was a beautiful place to be. When I was a kid, my first job was at the local library. And to make a long story short, I told my father, I'm bored. I want to work at the library, right? Because I was like 12 or something. My father would go right ahead. And so I had to put the books away and cause trouble, apparently. I was probably more trouble than it was worth. But all that aside, my father wasn't concerned if I was in the library. But now, what's the library have? graphic novels. Many are Japanese and borderline pornographic. Social justice programming, gender justice programming, justice in quotation marks because it's actually injustice. Every religion other than Christianity. It's Ramadan month. It's this, it's that. Don't be in a library in the month of June. You could guess why. Computers with unfettered access, obviously, to inappropriate things and video games and things that are just not edifying. You go to a library to do anything but learn. And that's why our society is becoming idiotic. So there you go. We have some audience comments. In my school, we used to use online math in the computer. Now we use paper for math. And not going to lie, I've learned better in paper than computer. And that is true. There's a different sort of learning with pen and paper. And again, to flout my credentials in teaching education, I took a course at Columbia University of Cognitive Psychology. And probably the most important course in my life, if I were to say, if you want some sort of like performance enhancer for my whole life, was that course. Now, the actual most important class I took in my life was a humanities course because that's how I became a Christian. But if you're going to go with performance, it's cognitive psychology because it's literally the life hacks of how to make a brain work and perform way above your level and help other people perform way above their level. And it's proven in cognitive psychology, my professor is Dr. Stephen Peverly, that when you, let's say with note taking, you take notes, you write them in your own words and in less words. That's the most effective way to store knowledge into long-term memory. And obviously that's how you ace tests. That's the whole point of learning that form of note-taking. But writing them with your hands in your own words with less words, because you're creating synthetic information in a sense. Because synthetic in the Greek means putting things together. You're taking things out there and you're organically making them your own. And then by using your hands, that just stores in a different part of the brain, which is more effective. And so this is important because people think just highlighting or recording their professor, or now these days they use AI to summarize what happened in the class. It's becoming a real issue. But that's not an effective way of actually assimilating information. There is studies that clinically prove empirically prove how people assimilate information. It requires the pen and paper. So that's a very good comment. We have this. Classic books are being rewritten for young readers, and they're often called remix and are filled with inappropriate content. That sounds, I purposely shield my kid from a lot of that. So that sounds true. And I don't even know that detail. I will add though, my son got into the book Pilgrim's Progress, which John Bunyan, a great Calvinist writer back in the day. It's a great story you could very easily orthodoxize if you want to, because it's about the spiritual life really. And that being said, there's like Little Pilgrim's Progress. So it's like a 300-page book, but it's with illustrations and for kids. And my son loves it. And so there's, I guess, good ways he could do it as well. We have the libraries have changed 100%. 100% changed the last 20 years and are not a safe place for kids. And yeah, it's true. It's scary. I struggle a lot with grammar, and it's my fault because I use AI for some of my schoolwork. It atrophies your mind. And the only person you rip off is yourself. So like, let me tell you a little story about my wife. When I was dating my wife, I thought, man, I hit a home run. She's beautiful. She'll never listen to this, so she's not gonna know this. She's gorgeous, right? And she's smart, right? She's an engineer. I'm not an engineer, right? So I'm like, oh, I've hit the gold mine here with my wife. And I started finding out, man, she's not as smart as she's gorgeous. And the point of telling this story is my wife will say the same thing. So I said, how on earth you got this full scholarship and go to America and go to American schools for free and all this stuff? And she said, honestly, it was a blessing. I never cheated like everyone else. It always just felt wrong to me. Again, in Asia, it's so common to cheat. It's not been seen as bad to cheat academically. Everyone that did well cheated. I just never cheated. I felt like I would be ripping myself off because the point of learning is knowledge. And God honored this even before she was a Christian and brought her all the way to America. And praise be to God, right? We're in the fullness of the truth in the Orthodox Church. So it's like, that's like hitting the lotto. The cosmic lotto is being an Orthodox Christian. But in a sense, this all began for my wife by not ripping herself off, getting the worst grade, right? And not cheating like everyone else. And that took her all the way from a third world country, from untold poverty that people don't understand, right? No, like, not even having energy and running water, stuff like this, to being here and being an engineer and being in the United States. And so even if you don't have this great rags to riches story like my wife, um, at the very least, knowledge is something, right? Like, I don't do what I went to school for, Father. I mean, you might, right? But not in the not the Nazarene church, right? Right? But like, I don't professionally teach education. I don't professionally teach history. I do these things, but it's not how I make money. And so at the end of the day, school is what it taught me skill-wise and educationally. It's why I could write this book up here. I would have ripped myself off if I cheated. Now, I still had great grades, but it's because I worked very hard. But that being said, don't rip yourself off. The AI is the point. We have this from Oriental Orthodox, went to public school my whole life, nothing Christ-centric at all. Of course, this teaches you materialism, the epistemology. Elijah, I had iReady back in middle school like 7 years ago. Elijah, you're that young? My gosh, everyone hated it. Well, you didn't like when he got the right answer, some sort of like, I don't know, Schnubby or whatever the cartoon characters are popped on the screen. In my school, we used online math. Oh, yeah, we read that one, I think. Right? He did the AI stuff. We used to write an essay and edit it with your hour by hand. Yeah, I grew up like that. Nowadays, learners don't even edit. Word does self-editing and they struggle with grammar. I think we've all become worse spellers. Have you become a worse speller, Father?
Probably. I mean, I used to have, a spelling dictionary that was just available so that if I was trying to remember how to spell a word, I could look it up easily. And I threw it away several years ago just because I use it so infrequently, because that's what computers do. But one of the human beings by nature will always try to take the easy way if that's the option that's in front of them rather than the hard way. But the problem is you're not going to learn things by taking the easy way. For example, if you want to pass on a second language in your home, the only way you're going to do it successfully is if you put your children in situations, extensive situations, where they have no choice but to speak the language that you're trying to make sure they speak. And because otherwise they're going to just speak English, and it's a lot easier to be monolingual than it is to be bilingual. It's a lot easier to let AI do your homework than it is to learn how to do it yourself. But you're obviously not learning the skills that you need to learn, and so I don't see any reason why a child needs any technology prior to them being well into their teens. I never touched a computer until I was in the 10th grade, and I became the on-site computer troubleshooter at a large office working for the state of Texas later on. So we don't have problems learning how to use cool technology later on. But if you get to have all that technology that makes it easier for you to not learn how to do things like math, you're not going to bother to learn it because you never had to. Many years ago, I was getting a cup of coffee before I went to the office, and after I whipped out a couple of bills to pay for the coffee, I dug into my pocket and got some change, and she'd already rung up the sale, and she froze because basically she was going to have to do some math to figure out what change to give me. And her supervisor came over because she just didn't know what to do. And she said, "Dummy, give him this." And I had to say, "I'm sorry, but that's wrong too."
Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh my God.
So I'd explain to him what change I should be getting back, because I was actually going to wind up with more money than I was due. So but that's the state that we've gotten to, unfortunately.
Now, it's the fact of the matter is almost every homeschool family, and this includes mine, every homeschool family that I've seen does use technology. It might be generational. I'm sure I'm going to get commenters. We have a total Luddite home. God bless you. But in this, I will cover inception education, maybe the responsible, or at least the pragmatic use of technology, whether this is spiritually good for a child or builds good work ethic or attention is a whole other question. But we were speaking about before how being a gatekeeper is important for entertainment and potentially apps. Now, I didn't cross and refuse to cross the app Rubicon. I think it's like giving a kid a cell phone. They shouldn't have that much control over something. I could speak pedagogically that yes, the ability to manipulate information and let's say spell on a screen is better than just watching spelling, let's say. So it's not that a app isn't effective. It's just that I have my own personal scruples that I think the benefits of acquiring and assimilating information from an app are outweighed by the deleterious effects on attention and on just behavioral regulation. And so that's the sort of judgment call I've made with technology. It might not be the right one, but we're having a discussion about this. For memorization, there's a channel called Jack Hartman, and you want your kid to memorize multiplication tables when they're 4 or 5. That's a good way to do it. And it sounds crazy where people go, well, learning your multiplication tables when you're 5, that's crazy. But kids memorize totally nonsensical things at that age. I've known parents in church that have their kids memorize little taglines and slogans from commercials because it amuses them. And it would seem like if kids just do it because they memorize, because whatever, right? They're just sponges and they don't really quite care what they're memorizing. They certainly don't care about slogans and commercials. But that being said, it's why not memorize multiplication? I know 2-year-olds that memorize multiplication. They're not even fully conversant, really. They know some numbers and words, but they know that 9 times 6 is 54, because they saw it in song. And so if you're going to give your kid entertainment, don't do Disney. You could have a guy strumming a guitar like Jack Hartman, singing about 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 2 is 18, and they do learn it. I call it inception education because they're not even trying to be educated, but it's something that you could do. I have found, let's say, cartoons about potty training to be very effective in helping a kid learn how to potty train, for example. So this might be a too indulgent use of technology. Father John might not agree with it, but I know homeschool parents that use the apps and everything. And so there's a spectrum here, and I'm giving a perspective of one end of the spectrum. It sounds like you want to interject there, Father.
Well, I don't have a problem with using educational videos, for example, and I wouldn't have a problem when your kids are maybe teenagers for them doing online classwork. Mm-hmm. But I would not let them have unfettered access to their computer, though. I would have them in a room where you're able to see what's on their screen, and I wouldn't let them use that computer as a means of them actually not learning the material. So I wouldn't be teaching them how to use AI. But, back when I was a kid, they had Schoolhouse Rock, and I still remember some of those songs, and it came in handy for learning a lot of things.
I'm an amendment to be, and I hope that they ratify me. Wait, no, that's The Simpsons.
I'm just a bill.
I remember that one. Yeah. And it's I don't know. That's a funny song where they pan that. There's other videos that I recommend because I like videos. Truglia and Films, their saint videos are great. I wouldn't recommend anything else that they do. But that being said, their saint videos are excellent, and I use them during Orthodox holidays that we always watch it. So, right, it's not just some random day on the calendar. We watch a video about the saint and things like that. And again, you're the gatekeeper. So it's not like they have this Beauty and the Beast and all these other options, which I didn't even like Beauty and the Beast growing up. They have much better options that exist. I like the Beginner's Bible cartoon from the 90s. I think it's fun, has animals. It's not theologically bad in any real way. It's just Bible stories. If they get older, especially boys, Superbook, it's like, it's more aggressive and, all sorts of things happen. It's 3D animation. It looks quite well done. And again, most Orthodox holidays are from the scriptures. And so I purposely, even the birth of John the Baptist, there's a video. So we have that from Superbook. It is Baptist. So sometimes you have to explain to the kid things that are wrong. And this is where I also do Eastern Orthodox films with subtitles. One, your kid learns to read. Two, they know there's another language and it can broaden their language horizons. And there's some very good videos depending on age. I really like the movie about Saints Peter and Fabronia. It's a really, it beats the socks off Disney movies and stuff with the action, the things involved. And there's some real cool stuff. If your kid reads, right? That only when they know what's going on is they're reading it. So it's another way to do it is to add those subtitles. Worth saying, but this is really younger kids, really young kids, is Scratch Garden. Now, what Scratch Garden has a lot of math stuff and it's silly things. And so it's another way useful. And there's shorter videos for like quick skill reinforcement. But I actually prefer longer videos because children are losing attention span. And right, Father, like we're veterans of watching 30-minute cartoons. Look at us growing up, and these days, if it's longer than 5 minutes, that's a big accomplishment. And so I'm sort of wary of shorter things, get a story, learn a story arc and get some sort of attention if you're watching something, but be the gatekeeper and choose things that are better for kids. Now, you can leave in the comment box if you got other fun things and educational things for kids to watch. Now, Montessori education, should we not be doing it? Now, Raising Them Right by St. Theophan the Recluse is actually a combination of his writings from other books, but this is a quote and the page number from that book. And he makes a very interesting observation because here's a saint talking about raising kids. So we should heed this. He says, one should not thereby inflate self-will and destroy the spirit for the sake of flesh. To avoid this, the chief things are moderation, a definite schedule, and supervision. And so the context here is more general about like how you organize your kid's day. You only give them so much time to play. And then after play, there's time for chore and for eating and kind of like almost a monastic schedule. I mean, what do you expect from St. Theophan? But that being said, a lot of homeschool mothers and some of the homeschool papas out there don't really have this regimented routine. And this is spiritually bad, I think. There should be moderation, a schedule, and supervision. And especially if you're going to homeschool, now that your kids, at least the one thing that a public school gets right, it's ran like a factory where the whistle happens and you go to the factory floor elsewhere, right? Or whatever. It teaches schedule and some sort of moderation in that effect. But some people homeschool because they're the opposite of schedule. They're the opposite of trying to get a routine down. In fact, having their kid go to a school gets in the way of their routine. And it's just this sort of free for all. And it's cloaked with this sort of Montessori idea that makes you more creative if you kind of reinvent the wheel every day. And I think actually the opposite, it makes someone totally immoderate and it has bad spiritual effects on the person and it feeds self-will. And St. Theophan warns against that. And so I think that begs the question, am I organized enough? And I see a lot of homeschool mothers that are extremely disorganized. And it begs the question, why are they homeschooling? Legitimately, the kids would be better in a regular school because there's just no organization here. You're teaching your children nothing, and they're just teaching them with disorganization because they're passively learning disorganization. And so that's a major Achilles heel because, right, you don't have a boss that's going to say you're fired if you're 5 minutes late. And it's easy to take the boss who loves you, who's the head of the household, and not listen to what he says or meet his expectations because at the end of the day, he will still love you, unlike the boss who will fire you and kick your butt to the curb, right? And so disorganization becomes a major Achilles heel. And one has to be mindful of this. If I'm going to opt into homeschooling, I want to be organized. I want to be what St. Theophan said. I want to teach moderation, have a definite schedule, and I need to supervise what's going on. And especially with the technological homeschool, there's parents that don't know their kids are 3 months behind because, well, they click next on the program. They should be staying up with it. You're not even supervising what they're doing in the school, right? Let alone doing it yourself. And this is the reality of a lot of modern homeschool mothers. They're not really teaching. And I think if we're going to do something, we should do something right. Whatever job you have, doesn't matter what it is, be working in Target, you should be doing it right. There's a spiritual benefit to that.
Yeah, to paraphrase King Solomon, whatsoever thou settest thy hand to do, do thy doggonedest.
There you go. I think I remember doggonedest in the King James. And so that being said, homeschooling is a job. Let me repeat. Homeschooling is a job, right? It's a job. You should be doing it right. And structure should be provided. Work that, like I supervise people, work does not get done unless I provide structure. They do not learn their job unless I provide structure. All right.
I agree with everything you're saying about the need for structure. The only thing I would say to balance it is I think even if you do a bad job of homeschooling, but you're making a sincere effort to do it, your results are going to be better than a public school in America today. Because the American, if you were in the Soviet Union, your kids would be getting indoctrinated by militant atheism and all kinds of stuff, but they actually would get an education in the Soviet schools. They would get a good education in those respects. Mm-hmm. We get all the indoctrination without the education in public schools today.
And that's true. And so there's that problem, but there's also a problem where I think because of the technology, right? When all that existed was textbooks and really lame videos that were 90 minutes long on VHS, it kind of forced the mother to be more hands-on and task-oriented. Now, a lot of that's out the window. And I've seen firsthand, literally almost nothing happening at the homeschool, kids becoming grade levels behind than even the worst public schools would provide them. And so,
but the thing is, I don't know that
moral. I agree with you.
I don't know that your kid could be more behind.
From a pedagogical viewpoint, they could be behind on skills.
I don't think your kids could probably be further behind than a kid who graduates from high school that can't read. And that's what happens in a lot of public schools today. I mean, obviously, that's not everybody's results, but that is a common result these days.
I've tragically seen it with homeschooling as well. It's like it's becoming this could be generational, but I've seen this with homeschool families my age and younger. It's becoming a real problem. And so again, you might see a lot of other stuff. You got a co-op at your church, and God willing, Father John's knows none of that occurs.
I couldn't imagine at least not accomplishing teaching how to read and write in a homeschool if you put in even half of an effort into it. I started teaching my kids to read when they were 3.5, and by the time they were 4, they were reading pretty well. So I mean that's an easy one right there. Teach your child to read 100 Easy Lessons. That's one of the best textbooks that I ever got.
We have this comment. There has been a shift in homeschooling in the last 10 years. In my generation, we were all organized and worked together to educate our kids. Now, a lot of parents are doing the least amount possible or putting them in classes. Older moms need to step up and show how to homeschool well. And that's a very epistle to Titus. Older women teach the younger women, right? So by all means. Now, let me emphasize, good education has goals and deadlines, right? There's not like when we get around to it, even when, again, this is homeschool. So if we don't meet the deadline, we fluff it and we extend it or we double up or we make it work somehow and we're flexible. But people have to have the idea there's a deadline or something just doesn't get done. And it's just like taxes. And so for that reason, homeschooling is not an excuse to not have deadlines. Deadlines are very useful. It's pedagogically, they're useful in work. Have deadlines, but just don't be OCD about it, of course. This is where I feel that pre-made curriculums with worksheets and videos could be helpful. Videos that might have snippets of instruction, especially when it gets more advanced and maybe on certain aspects where you may not know. Now, I personally don't use the videos. I don't feel that I need them. We work with just worksheets and we supplement with videos in the inception sort of mode. And that's been very successful. It requires me to be more hands-on and I'm very blessed with a very motivated and intelligent child. But that being said, the pre-made curriculum kind of forces you into a goal and deadline oriented thing, right? On these sheets, these skills are taught. And so I think you'd be pretty foolish not to employ pre-made curriculum, even if you supplement it or even we'll get into skip things or excise things that could be redundant. And lastly, on the issue of am I organized enough, the husband's the CEO in this homeschool corporation. He's the head of the household. And so there are interrelational things. We live in this fallen world where sometimes the homeschool becomes a sort of battleground to push back against the husband, and disorganization is part of that battleground. And this is very bad. It's actually the antithesis of how this should be working. It's worth pointing out, but I've seen it, and I've seen it more than once, which is why I say it. All right. So am I organized enough? Am I willing to have my husband be the CEO of this corporation? Now, I think this is a Christian no-brainer. The answer should be yes, but apparently, even among Christians that I know, this is not an automatic yes. And this is something people need to reflect upon. It's very important because I don't think it could be successful without that. Now, this is where I'm open to pushback, but don't get too creative. I think sometimes people try to make something so personalized because, I mean, that's why you probably are homeschooling to begin with. You want to put your personal touch in your children's education. I get it. But sometimes it gets so absurdly creative, like the picture we have there, that there is information overload and you're getting all sorts of things and no practical application. And the kid then doesn't get really anything useful out of it. And so why does this occur? I think homeschool families are not really normie, which is why they homeschool. And they can then fail to educate and instill the skills that they will, but they can fail to educate the skills for children to navigate a normie world, right? They could get so hung up in, we'll take, let's say, like the stereotypical Indian kid homeschooler and spelling 24 letter long words, which really in the real world, you're never really doing, but you got to win that spelling bee. It's so important that you don't learn real skills that are actually practical, that actually even help you beat tests like SATs and things like that. It's, you get into these rabbit holes that are educationally irrelevant. And I think that's why it's important to have a well-rounded curriculum. Your kid takes a special interest in electricity, then of course, by all means, let's do hands-on snap circuits and things like this, how to use a voltmeter. They're into art, then by all means, let's get into art and things like this. But in the end of the day, you can't have just art because your kid likes art. And the reality, we need to do things we don't always want to do. And that's the importance of a well-rounded curriculum. And as they get older, specialization, of course, increases, right? You could have a kid that's never going to be a rocket scientist or even really like books. And maybe the best thing for him to do will be to be a lineman or be an auto mechanic or to become a cook or things like this. And those are totally great things, perhaps even more spiritually beneficial than the white collar and the liberal arts sort of things. And so I don't say that even in a bad way. We give a well-rounded education to give our kids options. So I myself, for example, give my child the well-rounded education, not just in religion, but in reading, writing, grammar, mathematics, science, history, American history, and all that. But I also, he knows how to fold laundry. He knows how to wash dishes. He knows how to use a ratchet. He knows how to place a voltmeter on a circuit. He knows how to complete a circuit. And I will continue to look for opportunities as he gets older and larger to do things. I will teach him how to do brakes on the car, for example, and things like that. And so it's to make the education as well-rounded as possible, because eventually they're going to start focusing on something they like. And the reality is you are way better at what you like, but it's got to be something you like that's actually, productive, that will provide for you. So if he ends up gravitating towards working on cars or gravitating towards the math or sciences or, God forbid, the liberal arts like me, then so be it. I've given him all these tools and opportunities to do that. And that's why it's important to have a well-rounded curriculum. And pre-made curriculum makes it easier to have a well-rounded curriculum because you don't have to think that hard about it. And sometimes that's hard because we get fixated on that. And my last little point, because then I really, really want Father John's interjection on this, is to emphasize realistic math skills. because sometimes math gets forgotten because most people homeschool because of religious and social scruples. And so math is really an afterthought, and you need to emphasize the math and sciences, of course.
Right.
So, Father, what kind of curriculum did your daughters have?
We drew from a variety of sources, but the Moscow, Idaho Calvinist folks, like Doug Wilson,
Yeah.
they have a press called Veritas Press, and they probably still have it, but they had a catalog back when we were doing it that basically broke down different texts for different grade levels. And so we used those textbooks based on what we thought was the best in a particular area. So, for example, we use Saxon math, but we use different sources for history and stuff like that. One thing I would point out before I forget to make the point is that I don't think that homeschooling should be all on one parent. And so if the mom is doing the homeschooling during the day, when the father gets home, he ought to be doing some of it. And one of the things that I did, in addition to teaching my kids how to read and write, was I would read to them in the evening. And I think that in itself is it helps expand your children's attention span, because they're listening to a story that you're reading for more than 3 minutes, and kids enjoy it. My grandkids are always asking me to read stuff to them because their mom doesn't let them watch more than about maybe 30 minutes to an hour worth of TV a day if they're good.
I'm the same. Yep.
If they're good.
Oh yeah. That's their first punishment, by the way.
And then what I also did was, once they were able to read, was I would have them read the Bible to me, and I had them read in the King James Version. But actually, before I got to that point, one of the things I did was I read the tales of King Arthur and Robin Hood in the older English text. Mm-hmm. And so when we would come across things like quoth he, I would explain what quoth he meant. And the other thing I would also do is I'd have them watch Shakespeare's plays, on VHS recordings back then, or DVDs. And because I think that's how
DVDs.
Shakespeare was meant to be watched rather than read. It's kind of boring to sit down and read a play, but to watch it is very entertaining. But they also do learn Elizabethan English in a fairly natural way if they're watching Shakespeare on a regular basis. But I would have them read the King James Bible to me, and I would correct their pronunciation, explain any word that I thought that they might not understand. First, I'd ask them, you know what that word means? And if they gave me the wrong answer, I'd explain it to them. And so they became very comfortable with that. And so there's all kinds of things that you can do, even if you're only doing it in the evenings like I was doing. But I think
husbands need to be like Pete Rose.
Yeah.
For the young, Pete Rose was a baseball player who became a playing manager. So he managed a team, and he'd go up to bat, and that's how he has the all-time hits record.
Right.
He'd probably be in the Hall of Fame soon. He's been reinstated, though I'm against that as a baseball fan. But anyway, that being said, so husbands need to be playing managers. Or in my case, because I do the homeschooling, I'd like some help, someone batting cleanup behind me. So that being said, let's talk about choosing curriculum, because Father talked about this. I do think it's important, because of information overload, not to spend too much time procrastinating with a curriculum. Just pick one already. I really don't favor a backup, but I've noticed there's this kind of tendency with homeschool parents to use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they're constantly changing. And for better or for worse, right? Obviously, if you choose the custom curriculum, it's going to be optimized, but then you lose the comfort and familiarity. And the reality is, kids have comfort and familiarity, and there are spiritual and simply, I'd say, emotional effects that for regulating behavior that are negative in not having something familiar. And so there's loyalty to something familiar. It's why I forget which saint says this, but even why we shouldn't be moving town to town for every promotion and stuff like this. They're being grounded is something that's spiritually beneficial, but it's more than just even your house. It's your school, the school that you grew up in, or your curriculum. There is a familiarity. And kids pick up on this for better or for worse, because there's obvious benefits to I'm picking the best math and I'm picking the best English. I'm doing the best history. And I really hate the jingoism here. And I really am not going to do their spelling here. And I get that. But just be aware there's trade-offs. And the trade-off is losing that comfort and familiarity. I personally like the Bob Jones University curriculum pedagogically and religiously. It just kind of, they pepper it in. I don't get like their Bible curriculum for obvious reasons because I'm raising my child to be Orthodox Christian. But that being said, it's very skills-based, useful, tasteful with the religious stuff. Every once in a while, when there's a Protestant story, like if you're reading, just like in the reading and writing stuff, you just explain. Like my son read the Johnny Appleseed story. I don't know how much you remember about Johnny Appleseed, Father,
I
but
remember.
like Johnny Appleseed's like a fool for Christ. So my son like reads the stories like, was he Orthodox? Because he identifies lives the saints, right? With praise God that like he could pick up on these tropes. And I said, regrettably, no, but of course he'll have his spiritual blessings from God for where he did meet the mark of orthodoxy, at least in orthopraxy.
He was a Swedenborgian, actually.
Yeah, which is theologically very aberrant, by the way.
Right, yeah.
But he lived a very cool life anyway. Keyword lived, maybe not believed. So that being said, yes, you have to have discussion to kids about these things. Bob Jones University also happens to have more shortish videos for the skill-based stuff, which I think is more useful because you don't want a kid in front of a screen all day. So get the skill and then let's get it on paper and spend the time on paper, not in front of the screen. I know families that use the good and the beautiful. It has short steps and lesson plans. So it's kind of easy with facilitation. And so again, ease of use means more use, and that's important. But when it comes to curriculum, you got to look for opportunities to expand skills, whether programs, whether taking in other curriculums, making them yourself. When I lost stuff on the airplane, I had to invent curriculum. I give my child books about the saints in Cambodia and made math problems there, and he learns on the road. So look for opportunities to expand skills, and you could do that as well. So that's my comments on curriculum, but on things that are a little more extracurricular. Just be mindful. Any materials need an active role in discerning whether they're repetitive, right? In the end of the day, the benefit of homeschool is there's no one size fits all. So if there's not enough repetition, get more repetition, print out new worksheets from the internet or whatever. Or if there's too much, cut them out, cross them out. It takes time. It takes me like 15 to 20 minutes before I even teach. So I do this like first thing in the morning. We were telling our old man jokes this morning about what we do in the morning, getting the material ready for my son to use it. And I'm taking that much time, and he's 5, right? And so because it takes time, if you're being mindful of your kid's actual skill set, and now multiply that by your children. And then, of course, there's trade-offs when I know I have a cousin with 13 kids. When you've got, a quiver full of children, then there's obvious trade-offs. But I do think it takes time to maximize your kids' time. And so, yes, it's better than nothing. You just hand them the sheet and everything's in order. But if you take the time to optimize it, you save your kids' time, and then you can optimize that time for other things or other pedagogical things, whatever. But taking time to maximize your kids' time. I do think that there's educational ways to shake things up in free time. Like there's Khan Academy. And I'm talking about secular sources. So there's Duolingo, for example, but apparently you get advanced enough, it starts getting to the gender and alphabet stuff. And so there's limitations to that. Be mindful of secular sources and their morals, because our society has gone so downhill that a sort of innocuous statement about, let's say, a story a child reads about their stepfather bringing to the baseball game. Well, we're Christian families. Not all of us have stepfathers. This could be something like, again, there's Christians with stepfathers, so it's not bad to be a stepfather. But it could open a moral can of worms that is not necessary, which would obviously be necessary in a situation where there's a family with remarriage. And so there could be things that are just so innocuous because divorce is so common in the world, and things like this are akin to this. There could be single mothers and stuff in the secular material where it's nothing inherently wrong about being a single mother. It could be the husband was a total deadbeat, husband's dead. There's all sorts of things, but that exist and are not filtered in a secular curriculum. So we have to be mindful of that when we use this. And so let me just continue because we have a hard deadline today at 2 hours, so you guys know. So if it sounds like I'm blowing through it, Father, please interject, but I'll move on to the next subject for now unless you have any objections.
That's fine.
Let's talk about pedagogical methodology, which is, again, the part I love and what I'm academically trained in. Learn by doing is by far the most effective form of learning. It's not just some stupid slogan, all right? Learning by doing, right? It's not something people just say because it sounds good, because sadly, most slogans are stupid things people say just to sound good, and they don't really work in real life. But this is not one of them. Learning by doing is incredibly important and effective. When I worked in the auto repair shop, let me talk 2 ways how to learn to fix cars. How did my father teach me to fix cars? He would curse me out in Italian and say, you're doing it wrong. You are horrible. Expletive here. I'm going to do it. And push me out of the way and start fixing the car. It's kind of ironic given that my father is a famous automotive instructor, and that's not how he taught other people how to fix cars. All right. It's how he taught me how to fix cars. Now, how he taught other people to fix cars was hands-on, learn by doing. He actually had a very effective lewd joke about it, which I will not repeat, but you learn more by doing than reading or watching others do something, right? Like my father pushing me out of the way. I'm going to fix this ball joint. You don't know what you're doing is less effective than, get your hands on it. And, with small enough kids, you actually put your hands on their hands as they do it. It's incredibly effective because just like I said, writing things in less words with your hand in your own words stores things in long-term memory. This has been cognitively proven to work more effectively than any other way of assimilating information. I've learned this, again, in cognitive psychology with Dr. Stephen Peverly. In the same way, doing a brake job, when I taught mechanics, first time they do brakes, because, I had this, again, teenagers, young guys, I put my hands on their hands as they're putting the screwdriver on the brake pad, pushing in the brake caliper, the piston on the caliper, that sort of stuff. It's very effective. When I teach people in my job now, I dictate as they do it when they're using databases. Remember, I'm taking people and teaching the right legal reports and stuff like this that they've never done before. And so it's time consuming, but it's very effective to have them do it themselves. So you learn by doing. I can't emphasize enough. It's by far the most effective way of teaching. So when young, hold their hand. Of course, make it fun, right? Don't make something boring on purpose. Fun makes it more effective, but not too fun or fun all the time because then it just creates unrealistic expectations. It's sometimes there's nothing wrong with something being neutral. Not everything is a game. And that's something that's was being taught even when I was learning education. It's turn everything into a game. And that's why we have people that have no skills and discipline anymore because they never learned to bite their lip and actually just do the hard work and read a book and those sort of things. So make it fun, but not too fun, at least all the time. Encourage kids and don't give up. Your kids can learn more than you think. They could get way more advanced than you think. Your kid could start learning multiplication when they're 2. It sounds crazy, but they absolutely can. Encourage them. Don't give up. There's nothing wrong with singing a multiplication song. They will learn it, and they're not even gonna. It's not like you're the tiger mother. We will talk about tiger mothers. You could make it fun and normal, as in a normal amount of work, but by encouraging them, they could do more than you think they can. But just be mindful, right, Father? You're an experienced parent at this point. Your kids are grown up. Kids will try to get away with more with their own family of strangers. And so that's just, again, we get comfortable with the people we're close to. And there's obviously negative educational knock-on effects, right? The kids, I can't do it, and because kids push back their own parents more than strangers. So be mindful of that because there's obvious methodological implications to this. Memorization is good, as I was talking about with multiplication. even with kids, if you're going to give your kids cartoons, a great cartoon is Alpha Blocks. It's a BBC cartoon with no weird social issues in it, pretty much at all. And the letters get to these Monty Python skits. It's actually quite entertaining. And they say their phonetic sounds as they get into these Monty Python skits, because it's BBC. I guess the country's built on Monty Python. And your kid will learn to read because they're memorizing all the sounds in a fun way. And it's very effective. Your kid will learn to read much younger than you think is humanly possible, because you chose that instead of some useless cartoon about the stuff you see. That's total brain rot. So be mindful of that. Alpha Blocks. And it's the principle's memorization. There's nothing wrong with memorization. It's become a bad word. But it's very effective for the basics. You want a foundation. There's nothing fun about a quarry bashing the rocks to make a foundation to a house, but you need a good foundation, which may not be fun per se, to build a good house on top. But the benefit with a kid's foundation and memorization is it's not boring to them. And it's probably why God made them this way, so they can learn the way they do. And so it's not like what we think of memorization. They're just fine with memorization. In fact, you can make it games and fun with memorization. So don't run away from memorization. We kind of already dealt with napkin math. Don't do everything computers, pen and paper. Got to learn real world math. Napkin math is very important. You need to, when you homeschool, incrementally increase independence and time worked over time, obviously. When they're very young, it's very hands-on. You got to facilitate everything with the kid. And you're training them to facilitate their own, because in the real world, you're not going to have an IEP and a special education instructor or your mother holding your hand when you do something. So somewhere between the beginning and the real world, you got to learn to take after yourself. And so independence and time work have to be incrementally increased. And don't be a tiger mother. Now, I know about you, father, so you could tell me I'm totally wrong. My kid is grade levels ahead. We do 1 hour a day. It's not like a crazy amount of time. Might be a decent amount of time for a 5-year-old, but I want to make time for swimming. I want to make time for playing with my kid, silly games. I want to make time for board games. I want to make time for going for a walk or playing baseball in the park and things like this. Like, we do all that. In fact, because I think that's part of being a well-rounded, normal individual. And so I think with the right methodology, you could do all this in an hour, while the whole tiger mother thing is just like being a drill sergeant, and your kids do this for endless hours. That's their whole life. And I just don't think it's very spiritually healthy. We'll get into that in a little more detail. But it doesn't necessarily make them smarter, in my opinion, either. There's something to learning what you need to do in lesser time, so you could go on to do the stuff you want. It motivates you compared to just hitting your head against the wall. And I'll have a little more to comment on that when we get into tiger mothers. I don't know if you want to get into any details now, if you want to talk about the tiger mom first.
Well, I think that in terms of how much time you spend homeschooling, if you think back to when you were in school, if your schooling was like mine, I spent most of my time in an average school day waiting for something else to happen.
Yeah, it's all classroom management. There's no real education.
And I had an American history teacher that every day, with very few exceptions, the way the class went was open up your books to chapter such and such and read the chapter and answer the questions at the end of the chapter. Then you may talk quietly until the end of the period. And then he would sit there.
I grew up the same way.
and then he would sit there and watch basketball games on a VHS recorder because he was a basketball coach.
Oh,
and he was basically taking notes about, that was what he was really worried about. And so that was most of an hour that was totally wasted. I played a lot of chess when I was in high school because I was otherwise going to be sitting there bored out of my mind. And so I think that if you actually have focus, you can get it all done within a relatively short period of time, particularly when the kid's young. They're not going to have the stamina to do it all day and have it be productive. I when it comes to children, generally speaking, children do rise up to the level of your expectations. And so I don't think tiger moms are all wrong with having high expectations for their children.
Good. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I don't know if you ever watched Louder with Crowder, but he used to have his attorney on there a lot. Bill Richardson was his name, if I remember correctly. But his mother was Chinese, his father was American, and he wound up graduating from Southern Methodist University Law School. And his mother refused to be happy about it because she wanted him to become a doctor. And this guy, making great money, great career, but she just had this high expectation that he was going to be a doctor, and he did not live up to it. And I think that's not a healthy thing, to have unrealistic expectations about your children, but to have a high bar that you try to get your children to reach.
Did he see that like article about like the Korean guy that had like 2 PhDs? He's a Navy SEAL, and I forget what else. And it said every Asian child's worst nightmare, because now like the mother's like, why are you like that guy?
Yep.
That was great. And that takes us to the Tiger Mom, Amy Chua. And this really is one of those books where I legitimately enjoyed. I listened to an audiobook when my job back in the day was much more mobile, when I was in the field before I was promoted. And that being said, it's and so I can say I read it. I listened to the whole book. Amy Chua is actually the narrator. She does a really good job. It's very entertaining in that way, because her voice, the tone of her voice of things with all these personal situations. But you got to ask yourself, how on earth was this book ever written? I mean, I guess for the money, I guess people will do anything for the money, but it's a really crazy book. The actual parenting style in the Tiger Mom book is high expectations, which we agree is good, to the point of, though, insanity. She wanted her children to be like absurd, musicians and all this stuff. Caustic and bitter scrutiny, and actually, in her case, indirect facilitation. She was not a homeschooler. She worked full time at a Yale faculty, and she flew around the country and stuff. And so, I guess maybe this sort of really bitter and caustic style of parenting was to kind of compensate for the fact that she can only tongue lash you from a distance while she was busy, being a career woman. But that being said, so it's kind of a crazy book with even other details. Like, she makes this detail in the book that's saying, I'm the first Asian woman my husband ever dated. So like, it's not like he was just into Asian women, I was special. And you're like, wow, it's the Yale professor actually says this thing and refers to the stereotype, and somehow she rises above the stereotype. It's a pretty crazy and entertaining book in an amusing way. And I would say the only good thing to walk away from it from is high expectations, and everything else is like, wow, I don't want to put my child outside in the freezing cold because the 5-year-old didn't listen to me when the stories was that. It's a crazy book. Now, all things being said, told, right? These are Yale professor parents whose children did turn out well. They're both lawyers, their children. They both went to Ivy League schools. I think they both went to Princeton, if I remember right. I can't remember. But that being said, they're both lawyers, which speaks to me how they obviously must have benefited from family connections, which calls into question the parenting style being as effective as it might look, right? Someone could say, oh, it's effective because look, both kids are lawyers, and they're very successful. It's like, yeah, but their parents are lawyers and Yale professors they could network these things. That happens all the time. So I'm sure it's a little bit of both. I'm sure the kids are brilliant, and I'm sure that they benefited from family connections, but they're not completely self-made. Now, I think it's worth commenting on, I would say with both you and I, Father, one foot in Asia due to marriage and other foot in America, is that the East Asian hyper work schedule does build discipline. That's extremely underrated, because especially now kids lack discipline. So it builds discipline to the point of insanity. Like, it literally is the meme: kids at school 6 days a week for 14 hours a day. I remember seeing a video on this. I have a friend that's Chinese. He lives in Japan. And so I hit up my friend. I'm like, this can't be real, right? That's just like one school and they exist. And it's like, no, this is actually the average education is that's a sort of insane schedule. So yes, you make good factory workers that'll work ungodly hours and produce a lot, but you don't necessarily make creativity. But I do think it's worth saying that creativity could be overrated to a degree. Most of life is being disciplined. Most of us aren't so overly creative that we will outdo our creativity. So there's something to the hyper schedule, but I guess within reason. And so the good thing to walk away from Tiger Mom is, yes, creativity, that discipline is important. And simply saying, oh, I'm going to have no discipline at all because they'll make my kids more creative really isn't a good response to that. I think rather the issue is this is a false paradigm. All right. That discipline versus creativity is a false paradigm, right? You can't just, it's not you choose one, you choose the other. Lulu, one of the Tiger Mom's children, made this comment. I lost, this her comments on her upbringing, that childhood innocence, that sense of joy and wonder, and definitely felt a lot of stress. Now, I think no parent that loves their kids wants their kid to have no joy and to have a bunch of stress, right? And so you could be disciplined without like having no joy in anything. So yes, more people need discipline than creativity, which can't really fully be taught. We need to maintain discipline and teach work ethic, but there needs to be a reasonable schedule, right? The schedule, like St. Theophan said, creates moderation and discipline, but that schedule could include playing, right? St. Theophan talks about that in his book. It does include playing and exploring interest and, and fishing and unwinding. There's nothing wrong with the kid playing the quarter and just screwing around, right? It can include these things, and sticking to a disciplined schedule, which allows for these other interests, actually instills discipline, right? So you could instill discipline and allow for creativity, and you could have creativity with having a schedule, right? So this paradigm where it's either discipline or creativity is false. I do think, and we might not have the time for the pushback, so maybe Combox, is that sports and music tend to be a black hole. Like the parents that are blockheads want their kids just to excel at a sport to the point of insanity, and it's just nothing but the sport. And that's a total waste of time. And it's like trying to hit the lotto. Your kid's probably not going to be Roger Clemens. In fact, Roger Clemens didn't start like playing full-time sports until he was in high school. So it's like people bringing their kids in travel leagues way too young, because a lot of athletes aren't doing anything serious until they're much older. Like Aaron Rodgers didn't start doing sports full-time till 8th grade. So like you don't have to bring them to T-ball so they go to the next thing and the next thing so they can do sports. Sports should be for fun. But the Tiger Mother does this with music. Your kid's likely not going to be Yo-Yo Ma. Your ability to hit it big in music is just as unlikely as hitting it big as sports. It's a time sink. It should only be pursued with any huge amount of time because it's just loved so much.
Also, studying music is helpful in terms of other things, though, like math. People who are good at math also tend to be good at music, and they kind of feed each other.
Some of it's environmental too.
Yeah,
you hang out the music kids; they're less likely to be derelicts like the sports kids. So for no other reason, it's just you're surrounded by slightly better influences.
right. And also going back to the Tiger Mom thing, I know that growing up in Houston back in the 70s, after the Vietnam War ended, we had boat people from Vietnam that came and settled along the Gulf Coast, and most of these people were fishermen when they arrived here, and so they basically were taking all the jobs from the Gulf Coast fishermen that were here. But what happened was, within a generation, all their kids didn't grow up to be shrimp fishermen. They grew up to be doctors and lawyers and engineers. So if you look at the Vietnamese population in Houston today, it went from coming from a little village in Vietnam and fishing for a living to being at the top of the economic totem pole, so to speak. So I think that anything could be taken to excess, but I think there are definitely things that you can see things in another culture like that and say, here are the good things I can take from that, but maybe I'm not going to go crazy with it. One of the Desert Fathers said, anything that's of excess is from the demon. So anytime you take anything from it to an excess, even if it's a good thing in and of itself, it can become demonic. but taking things in balance, that would be good. So I think there's a lot to admire with that kind of a culture and a lot to learn.
Yeah, life is balance, and that's why have interest and fun. That's good for EQ, and it could be worked into a schedule which instills an inner discipline, which is very useful. And that's why I want to end on the note of setting good goals, right? And goals that are meaningful. Like winning isn't SAT scores; it's going to heaven, right? We're trying to raise children for the kingdom of God. That is really the end goal. Now, secondary goals are consistent with the proceeding, right? Good morals, work ethic, self-discipline, the skills to provide for oneself, the ability to navigate a foreign world. Like I said, to have that EQ. So like you're in the world, but not of the world. I mean, those all help you be successful, and they're consistent with good pedagogy and a good education. But they're consistent with the true goal, which is again, heaven. That is our goal. Um, Homeschool, because it could be tailored to really be for heaven, can be superior to standard schooling. So I hope someone watching this considers homeschooling as a valid option for their kids, or as an educational supplement, that their kids go to a public school or a private school, but they still continue the homeschool, so that way they could make it even better. Because again, the idea is to educate our kids so they can provide for themselves and be good, moral, upstanding citizens, and ultimately, by God's grace, go to heaven. I mean, that's really our main role as parents, is to raise our children to be good Christians. And that's why, on a side note, I'm graced where I have the ability to provide for my family, and now work in the days that are Orthodox feast days, and and bring my kid to all those services. And so that way our life gets conformed to the liturgical calendar of the church. And so these are things that are like, there's no schoolwork on those days, there's no schoolwork on Sundays. So we try to make the school not Tiger Mom way, right? Where it's just education for the sake of accomplishment, and right, whoever wins the most toys and money dies, and dies the most money wins, but rather education towards the kingdom, to be a good Christian. And again, that's the goal. It's in God's hands, what happens with my son. I could water and God gives the increase. And so those are my last comments on the question, Father. How about yours?
Well, in Texas, they just passed a voucher program. I don't know all the details of how it's actually going to work, but probably had they had a voucher program back when my kids were little, I would have put them in a private school. But I think that even if you have the option of putting your kids in a private school these days, you have to be concerned about what are the other kids in that private school going to expose your kids to. And I know years ago, James Dobson, who was a Nazarene, but also a child psychologist, I remember him saying that it's best to at least keep your kids at home until they're about 8 or 9 years old. So I think even if you only homeschool your children when they're very little, they're probably going to be better adjusted and better able to handle school if you put them in later. And if you happen to be like when I was just in Moldova, the public schools in the village that I was in Salkutsa, the two younger priests and their wives teach in the public schools. The curriculum is very orthodox.
Yeah.
If I was in Salkutsa, Moldova, my kids wouldn't be homeschooled. I would be putting them in the public school because they would be getting a good Orthodox education. The parish priest would be the one spending the time making sure they got an education. But we're not there in the United States, and if you think the schools are the way they were when you were young, you're probably wrong. It's just, my mother had no idea of how bad schools were when I was a kid, but compared to today, kids were wonderful. The discipline in the schools that I went to was something that you don't see in public schools at all. You might have had kids smoking pot at the bus stop, but once they got into school, people knew not to mess around because a coach would be paddling your behind very quickly.
Gen X knew how to compartmentalize these things. which it seems like the younger generations have lost the ability to do.
Yep.
Yeah, it's some kids are just more social and they really are better in school, but really they're there for the social element. And so then I still think this is where homeschooling still is a valid option, despite all that. And so this is something that each family should work out. And it depends on age. Some kids are not comfortable going. It's notorious that on the first day of school, a lot of kids cry. And that's almost a natural way of saying they're not ready to leave home because they're crying and they don't want to leave home. That would be in their mind. Other kids are ready to go. I want to hang out with my friends, So again, it depends on the kid. And this is where the family's got to make informed decisions. Now, before we do audience questions, I just want to remind people, if this video has blessed you, like, share, subscribe to this channel, help other people, be aware of what we're doing here at Orthodox Christian Theology. Also, please donate to the mission in Cambodia. We are translating the saint lives for a $10 donation. A single saint life will be available that hasn't been available before in the Khmer language. We're also looking for donors to help the church in Sinagville to replace the wall that protects the church that was destroyed pretty much by the Cambodian government. We're looking for $45, $100 donations. And so if you could donate towards that, that'd be useful. But even if it's just $1 or if it's $1,000, if this has blessed you, please bless the churches in Cambodia. OrthodoxChristianTheology.com/donate. Links for PayPal, Patreon for monthly contributors, and also Venmo are below. Now, Father, could you please tell people how they could follow you and St. Jonah? You guys reached 1,000 subscribers yet?
We got the number of subscribers to where we can live stream on a handheld device now. I can't remember what it was, but it's we got there.
So now you could live stream with your daughters in Matushka.
That's right.
They could have their own homeschool react video to our video on your channel.
Yep.
And so and your blog?
Well, it's Father spelled out John.blogspot.com, and the parish website is Saint spelled out Jonah.org.
All right, so there we go. So please check out Father John and share what he's up to. We're going to do some audience questions very quick because we're already over our hard deadline. How would you incorporate Orthodox theology and spirituality into daily lessons, Father?
Well, part of your daily lesson should be reading the Bible.
Yes.
And reading the lives of the saints.
Yep.
And so in the midst of doing that, you'll be covering those topics. And reading the law of God was something that we did. So catechesis. But also throughout the day, this in Deuteronomy, it says we're supposed to be teaching our children the way of the Lord constantly. So there's always opportunities in any given day for you to talk about those things. You just need to look for them and be busy about it.
All right. Very good question there. We have Orthodox Family Life. If you have a teen that needs a phone, there are many new dumb phones that have the functionality of a smartphone without any browsing. There's still flip phones I've seen. And also, not for nothing, I don't know. I grew up without a phone. I didn't die. I just don't see how all of a sudden it's like a death sentence not to have a phone. I don't get it.
Yeah, I was in my 30s before I got a cell phone.
Yeah, it's called having a schedule, right? And if you have to, you call from school or wherever you are and go, I'm going to Johnny's house after school. Is that okay? Or your kid's at the Y, you drop them off there. You should know he's at the Y. And and the older they get, I'm going to be one of three places here, or there. And all right, be home by 6:30. After 6:30, then I'm going to freak out or whatever. I don't know. I don't think you need a phone, but yes, they've got the watches where they only have 5 numbers in them and all sorts of stuff. So we have that, but I'm for now very skeptical about the necessity of a phone personally. But hey, when my kid makes money, he can go buy a phone. That's the privilege of making money. I was homeschooled to turn out fine, so that makes one of us here, right? If you are new to homeschooling, find a homeschool mentor who has a similar family culture and educational philosophy, which is very good advice. And again, very consistent with Titus chapter 2. We have what Orthodox resources available for Orthodox homeschoolers? Father, do you know any?
There's some schools that are online. So if you wanted just to keep your kids home, but you wanted to also have other people do the teaching, you could. I think St. Raphael, there's like St. Raphael Orthodox Academy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably more than one option along those lines that is actually a totally online program.
Now in Houston, oh, what's her name? She sings. She makes all the music, and she's a
Uh,
teacher at the school there.
Korea Gigi Baba.
Yes, Gigi.
Shadid. That's her
Yeah,
married name.
Gigi
Baba's
Shadid,
her
right?
maiden name. Yeah.
Yeah, um, it's I picture an idea that her school, being that's already an Orthodox academy, right? Isn't it? I forget if it's the St. John Chrysostom Academy or what they're
Well,
called.
there's St. Constantine School that is in Houston. It's on the other side of town,
Okay.
unfortunately, but it's close to that parish. And
Yeah.
it's
So like,
it's a very good. Like a K through college program. It's really good.
yeah. So like, it's that'd be the perfect people to start integrating. Like, they already got lesson plans that they could start making Orthodox videos and Orthodox
Yeah.
content and Orthodox curriculum. And you even have creative people like Gigi, who I hope is listening, that can like start making the children's stuff, which needs songs and cartoon stuff, but it costs money, right? The
And,
reality is it needs money, but I'm hoping that Orthodox could start pooling the resources and making a serious Orthodox alternative to something that's excellent, like Bob Jones University Homeschool.
as it happens, just the other day, I was riding in my daughter's van, and she was playing her stuff to keep the kids entertained while we were driving around. And it's Orthodox content. Nothing wrong with that. It's on YouTube.
Oh yeah, it's we're old and we have the CD, and I don't know her songs, Mary, 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 the Mother of God. It's
Yeah,
the Marian Hall. It's a great CD. The
yeah.
we have Orthodox Family Life plugging Saint Amelia conferences, Saint Cosmas conferences, Paideia Classic, Saint Raphael's School Classic Learning Resource Center, et cetera, et cetera. And please put them in the com box here. And so, Father, we've both gone over time, and so we're gonna call it a day now. But it's been great to have you on this topic. It's an awesome topic, and it's strange we haven't talked about it in all these years in the collaborations. But thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insight.
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to end this show by how I end all of them by quoting Jesus Rock: "Fight to death for the truth. The Lord God will fight for you." God bless you. Have a great day.